Wyoming Territory. 1879, the wind came off the snowy range like it had something to prove, and by the time it reached the town of Elk Hollow, it carried dust, thunder, and the sound of a woman refusing to stay quiet. Mira Sutton stood on the porch of the town hall, hands clenched tight at her sides, voice steady as she faced the crowd. "I saw what he did," she said. "Sheriff Cass put his hands on that girl. She is 14. You all know it." The townsfolk shifted, eyes darting, some stepping back like her words might brand them. Mira's voice didn't shake, even when a few of the men scoffed and muttered things under their breath. "She should learn when to keep quiet," one said. "She makes trouble," another added. "Always has." Mira's jaw tightened. She had grown up in Elk Hollow, and she knew what it meant when people started using that tone. Her father had been a rancher before the fever took him, her mother a seamstress who died with a needle still threaded through her fingers. Mira had taken care of her younger sister until the girl married out of state. Now, at 23, she lived alone in the small cabin her parents left behind, worked as a part-time teacher, and refused to look away when harm was done. The doors of the saloon creaked open, and boots hit the dirt. He came out into the afternoon glare like he had walked out of the sun itself, tall, dust scuffed, lean with a strength that settled quiet through the shoulders. Tanis Shepherd had come to Elk Hollow 3 years back with a half-broken horse and a rifle that looked older than the town. He had never said much, never caused trouble, but his eyes had always found Mira in a room. He stopped beside her on the steps. "You speaking truth, Mira?" he asked, voice low. She turned to him, nodding once. "I saw it with my own eyes." And they all want to pretend it didn't happen. The crowd grumbled louder now. Some turned to leave, others stayed to gawk. But Tanis didn't look at them. He looked at her. "Then I'll shout beside her," he said, and his voice carried. Everything went still. "You do not know what you're doing, Shepherd," the banker warned, voice tight. "You speak against the sheriff and you'll be run out of town like her." "I know what I saw in her eyes," Tanis said. "And I ain't ever seen her lie." People started scattering then, their courage folding like wet paper, but Mira didn't move. She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "You sure about this?" she asked, soft enough only he could hear. "You think I would stand here if I wasn't?" They walked off the steps together, not hand in hand, but close enough. A few people spat in the dust behind them. The sheriff was not in town that day. He had taken his horse north to check on his brother's ranch, and that bought them a little time. That night, Mira lit a single oil lamp in her cabin and sat with her back straight, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. A knock came just before midnight. She opened it to find Tanis there, hat in hand, his eyes serious. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe," he said. "I am." She stepped aside. "You can come in." He hesitated only a moment before stepping through the door. The cabin was warm, the fire low, tea still steaming on the table. "You didn't have to stand up for me like that," she said, handing him a mug. "I did not do it for thanks." "Then why?" He met her eyes. "Because you were right and because I could not stand there and stay silent." She looked down at the tea. "They will come after me now. They will come after both of us." Something about the way he said it made her chest ache. He was not afraid, not of the sheriff, not of the town, not of the weight of standing beside a woman everyone else wanted to shame. "I do not know what happens next," she admitted. "We take it one day at a time," he said. And because the silence between them was not empty but full of something deeper, she reached out and touched his hand. He did not pull away. Days passed. Sheriff Cass returned to a town split down the middle. Some called Mira a liar, but others quiet wives, old ranch hands, and the girl's own mother started to whisper that maybe Mira had only said what they were too afraid to. Tanis stayed close. He never made a show of it. He helped mend her fence. He brought by extra flour when snow hit early. And when she taught children under the pine tree behind the church, he stood nearby and watched, rifle strapped across his back like a promise. It was not until the sheriff cornered Mira near the general store that everything changed. "You think I will let you ruin me?" he hissed, hand tight on her arm. "I think you already did that yourself," she said, chin high. Tanis came around the corner then, eyes locked on the sheriff. "Let her go," he said. "You got no badge, cowboy." "No," Tanis said, "but I got a spine." "And a witness." The sheriff hesitated, and that was all the time Mira needed to shove his hand off her. A few townsfolk saw it. Some gasped. Some nodded. Later that week, a letter arrived from Cheyenne. The governor's office had received Mira's petition, signed by 6 other women, 2 ranchers and the local pastor. An investigation would begin. For now, Sheriff Cass was removed from duty. Mira stood on her porch that night, arms folded, watching the stars. Tanis sat beside her on the steps. "You still think they will come after you?" he asked. "They might," she said, "but I am not scared anymore." He took her hand then, and this time she held it tighter. "You were never alone, Mira." "I know," she said, leaning into him. "Not anymore." And just like that, the wind softened. The night felt warmer. And the woman who dared to speak out found herself not just heard but loved. The snow didn't hold to the ground, just drifted like sifted flour across the hard, packed dirt outside the schoolhouse. Mira closed the shutters one by one, her fingertips numb from the cold. The children had gone home hours ago, their laughter lingering in the corners like echoes. She wrapped her shawl tighter, not from the cold but from the quiet that followed too close these days. Behind her, the door opened with a creak that didn't startle her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Tanis. "They're saying the sheriff's packed up his things," he said, setting a basket on the table. Left without looking anyone in the eye, she nodded. He never did like witnesses. He stepped beside her, his coat dusted with flakes. "You going home soon?" "I will, just needed a few still minutes." He didn't fill the silence, just waited. The two of them had grown used to speaking only when it mattered. She leaned her hip against the desk and looked at him. "Did you ever think it would end this way?" "No," he said. "But I figured if it ever did, it'd be because someone finally stood long enough." She reached into the basket, pulling out a wrapped bundle. "You brought bread." "Mrs. Carlin owed me for fixing a gate. Thought you might need it more." She smiled, small and tired. "I never used to take help." "I know." She hesitated before asking, "Why'd you come here in the first place? Elk Hollow's not exactly welcoming." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat, pulling off his gloves. "I pulled a man from under a wagon 3 winters back out near Rawlins. Thought he'd thank me. Instead, he told me I looked too much like the folks who used to raid his father's land." She sat across from him, resting her chin on her hand. "You're part Kiowa," he nodded once. "My mother's side." She watched him. "Is that why you never stayed anywhere long?" "Most places don't let you forget what you are. I figured if I had to keep moving, I'd at least move somewhere quiet. And then you found this place. And then I found you." She looked away, but her voice stayed steady. "I wasn't easy to find. Always looking the other direction. I noticed. A bird called once outside, lost in the wind." She stood, walking over to the stove, and added another log. "You plan on staying now? I haven't had a reason to leave." She turned, slow and deliberate. "I don't want pity or protection. I've had too much of both, and they come with a price. I'm not offering either." "Then what are you offering?" He met her eyes. "Company, a place beside you, not in front." She didn't answer, not right away. Instead, she crossed the room, stopping close enough that the warmth of him reached her before his hands ever could. "I've been waiting so long to not have to fight alone," she said. "You don't anymore," he told her. The wind shifted, and the room felt smaller, like it had drawn in to hold them. She reached for his hand. "Will you walk me home?" he nodded, standing. "Always." They stepped out into the night, boots crunching through the thin layer of snow. No one watched them walk, but if they had, they'd have seen two people who no longer moved like separate things. The town still whispered, still held tight to its judgments, but Mira and Tanis walked past it all. By the time they reached her cabin, the sky had cleared. Stars blinked cold and sharp above the pines. She paused at the door, one hand on the latch, the other still in his. "Come in," she said. "I'll put water on." He followed her inside without a word. The fire was low, but it caught with a little coaxing. She filled the kettle and set it over the flame, moving around the space with the ease of someone used to solitude, now making room for more. He took off his coat, hung it near the door. "I can fix that draft under the sill tomorrow. Thought you weren't offering protection." "I'm offering warm toes." She laughed, the sound unfamiliar in her own throat. "You're hard to argue with. Most things worth keeping are." She poured the tea once it boiled, and they sat close, knees brushing beneath the table. The silence between them stretched again, but this time it settled lighter, like it had made peace with itself. "I don't know what comes next," she said, voice soft. "I do," he said. "We build something. Even if the town still looks sideways at us, they'll get used to seeing us together." She didn't answer, just reached for his hand again. He held it like it was already his. The thaw came late that year. By early April, the creeks still held ice along their edges, and the mountains wore their snow like a last defiance. Mira stood in the garden behind her cabin, sleeves rolled to her elbows, coaxing the earth back to life with a rusted hoe and quiet determination. Her hands were blistered from the frost-hardened soil, but the ache soothed her more than rest ever could. Tanis had gone into the southern pasture with Lee Granger to help mend a collapsed fence. The man had stopped Mira outside the mercantile 2 days prior, eyes wary, voice low, asking if Tanis might be willing. She'd nodded once, and that had been enough. A robin landed near her foot, bold and round. She paused her digging and crouched, brushing a curl from her cheek with the back of her wrist. "You're early," she said to the bird. "Or maybe I'm late." The bird hopped once, then flew off, wings sharp against the sky. She straightened slowly, back stiff, and turned toward the sound of hooves along the ridge. Tanis crested the hill at a canter, then slowed when he saw her in the garden. His shirt was damp with sweat across the shoulders, and his hat hung from his saddle horn. He dismounted near the gate, brushing dust from his trousers before leaning both arms across the fence. "Lee's barn's leaning worse than he wants to admit," he said. "One good wind and it'll sit down permanent." "I warned his wife last fall it needed shoring," Mira replied. "She said he'd get to it after harvest. He got to it today, with me and a hammer that's seen better years." She tilted her head. "You hurt yourself?" "No, but I did pick up 3 splinters and 2 new opinions about chickens." She smiled. "That sounds about right." He watched her a moment, eyes following the path her hands had cut through the garden. "You planting potatoes again? Potatoes, onions, and beans if the soil warms quick enough. You always plant like you're staying forever." "I am." He nodded once, slow. "Then I should help you finish digging. You're already bone tired." "I don't mind." She opened the gate, stepping aside. "There's a second hoe near the shed." He moved past her, easy in his steps, and within minutes they worked side by side, the sun slipping lower behind the trees. Neither spoke for a long while. The rhythm of the digging filled the spaces between them, and in that quiet Mira felt something settle deep in her chest, a sense of shared purpose, not spoken but understood. As the last row was turned, she leaned on the handle and looked over at him. "You've been taking on more work lately," she said. "Folk don't look at me the same way they did before. Better or worse. Different. Like I became real to them, she nodded. Truth has a way of dragging folks into clarity. He glanced at her, brow furrowed. I heard from the marshal's office, she straightened. About the sheriff, he won't be coming back. He's taken a position in Nebraska, no charges but no badge either. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, that's more than I expected. It's not justice. But it's something. She looked down at the soil between her boots. Sometimes I think about that girl Ruthie. Wonder if she knows she was believed. She will, he said. You made sure of that. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp scent of pine and wet bark. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, then looked at him. I've been thinking about building a porch, she said. He raised an eyebrow. You want help? No, I want you to build it. His mouth quirked almost a smile, but not quite. You offering me work? I'm offering you a reason to stay after the garden's done. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them slow and sure. I already had one. They stood like that, the last light falling across their faces, the earth between them worked and ready. He reached for her hand, not sudden, not hesitant, just honest. I want to build more than a porch with you, he said, voice low. She didn't answer with words. She stepped into the space he left open, wrapped her arms around his waist, and laid her head against his chest. The spring wind moved through the trees, and the world felt like it might begin again. And for the first time in years, Mira let herself believe it would. By late May, the porch was nearly done. Tanis worked with steady hands, measuring each board with the quiet focus of a man who'd spent years building things no one ever asked for. Mira sat nearby with a basket of mending, the rhythm of her needle echoing the scrape of his plane over wood. The lilacs along the fence had begun to bloom, their scent thick in the warm air. She hadn't planted them, her mother had years ago, but they'd survived each winter, stubborn and fragrant come spring. You ever build a porch before? She asked, knotting thread between her teeth. Built a jail door once, he replied, not looking up. This is nicer work. Mira lifted an eyebrow. Where was that? Out near Medicine Bow. Sheriff there lost the key, thought iron hinges might help keep the drunks from wandering off. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. Did it work? They figured out the window was loose within a week. He set the plane down and stretched his back. The sun caught in the deep line of his jaw, casting shadow across his neck. She wasn't used to seeing him at ease. It suited him more than she would have guessed. You've been quieter lately, he said, wiping his hands on his trousers. I've been thinking, she answered. About what comes next. He sat on the edge of the porch frame, resting his elbows on his knees. And what did you come to? That I don't want this to be temporary. He didn't move, didn't speak right away. Then, mean the porch or me, she set her mending aside. I mean the life we're building, I want it to last. He nodded slowly. I've been wondering when you'd say it out loud. You knew. I hoped. She crossed the short distance between them, boots brushing over the sawdust, and stood in front of him. You planning to stay because of me? I'm staying because you make this place feel like something I can belong to. She reached for his hand. I'd like to start talking to Reverend Ellis. Tanis blinked once. About marriage, about planting roots. His fingers curled around hers, steady and warm. You sure? I've never been more. The breeze stirred her hair across her cheek. He brushed it back without asking, the calloused pad of his thumb catching at her temple. She didn't flinch from the touch. I never thought I'd be welcome anywhere long enough to call it home, he said. You are now. They stood like that for a moment, the unfinished porch beneath them and the scent of lilac in the air. Then she stepped back and picked up her sewing again. You still have 2 more boards to fit, she said, voice lighter. I'll get to it, he replied. Now that I know who I'm building it for. Later that afternoon, a knock came at her door. Mira opened it to find Ruthie's mother, Mrs. Havers on the stoop, her hat clutched in both hands, eyes red but dry. "I heard you were planting again," she said. Mira nodded. "I was. I've got extra pea seed and I thought maybe you wouldn't mind if Ruthie came by to help in the afternoons." Mira stepped aside, holding the door open. "She's always welcome." Mrs. Havers hesitated, then stepped in. "You were braver than the rest of us." "I was just first." "No," the woman said, voice firm. "You stood when it cost something." Mira didn't offer comfort. She offered tea and a seat at the table, the kind of peace that came not from forgetting but from walking forward with your head high. After Mrs. Havers left, Tanis returned with a bundle under his arm. He set it down on the porch and unwrapped it to reveal a worn but well-cared-for cedar sign, the edges carved with a steady hand. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I've carried too long," he said. "Figured it ought to be useful now." The sign read, "Shepherd and Sutton." She ran her fingers over the lettering. "You made this before asking me?" "I made it hoping." Mira took it from his hands and hung it above the porch beam herself. When she stepped back, Tanis reached for her again, not possessive, not hesitant, just certain. They stood beneath the name they'd chosen, the life they'd built not from ease, but from truth and choice. And no one in Elk Hollow questioned it anymore. By early July, the heat lay heavy on Elk Hollow, pressing down from a sky bleached pale with sun. The cottonwoods along the creek had dropped their seeds weeks ago, and now only the soft rustle of their leaves broke the stillness that settled in the afternoons. Mira stood beside the well, drawing water in slow, practiced pulls. A sheen of sweat clung to her neck, and her dress stuck to the backs of her knees. By the time the bucket reached the top, her palms burned from the worn rope, but she didn't pause. She dipped a ladle into the cool water and poured it over the roots of the tomato plants that lined the edge of the yard. The ground drank greedily. From the ridge above the cabin, Tanis returned on horseback, leading a second mount loaded with timber. He dismounted with a grunt, brushing the dust from his shirt as he led the horses to the shade. "You find what you needed?" Mira asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "More than I thought. Collier's boy had some walnut planks he didn't know what to do with." She shaded her eyes. "You trade for them," offered him a month's worth of lessons. "He's been wanting to learn to track sign." She tilted her head. "You taking on students now? Only the ones worth the trouble." He unfastened the load and stacked the boards near the porch. The walnut was dark with a reddish grain, smooth in places where age had worn it down. "What are you planning to use it for?" Mira asked, stepping closer. "Thought I'd build a cabinet." "For your books," he said. "They've been stacked in corners too long." She blinked once, then looked away. "You remembered that," he nodded. "You always shift them when you sweep. Figured they deserved better." She brushed her fingers over the edge of the plank. "You plan things quiet, don't you?" "I figure most things worth doing don't need announcing." They turned toward the house together, steps falling into rhythm. Inside, the air was cooler, drawn through damp cloths hung over the windows. Mira had been drying mint and wild rose petals on a rack near the stove, and the scent lingered sweet in the air. He poured a glass of water and passed it to her. She drank, then set it aside. "I got a letter today," she said. He looked up, waiting. "From my sister in Kansas. She heard about what happened here. Word's gotten out." He leaned against the table. "You thinking of going to see her? She wants to come visit." He raised his eyebrows. "She's never met you," Mira added. "I imagine she'll have questions." "She always does." He crossed his arms. "You want me to meet her?" "I do." He nodded once. "Then I will." The kettle began to hiss, and she moved to pull it off the flame. He stepped behind her, not close enough to crowd, but near enough she could feel the warmth of him there. "I reckon she'll see what I see," he said. She turned, holding the kettle between them. "And what's that?" "A woman who stands in her own light." She didn't answer. She stepped around him, poured the tea, and brought the cups to the table. "You ever think about what else we might build?" she asked, her voice quiet now. He met her gaze. "I do." She waited. "I think about a place where we don't have to explain ourselves, a stretch of land maybe further out, where the only voices we hear are each other's." She sipped her tea. "You sure you wouldn't miss the noise?" "I've already got what I came to Elk Hollow for." She set her cup down. "You'd leave this place?" "I'd go anywhere, long as you were there." The clock on the shelf ticked softly. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Then let's talk to Reverend Ellis this Sunday." He turned his hand to thread his fingers through hers. "We'll make it a quiet thing," she said. "Just us and the wind through the pines." He nodded. "And the sound of your name beside mine." That Sunday, they stood beneath the cottonwoods behind the church. The rest of town gathered in respectful silence. Reverend Ellis spoke few words, simple ones, honest. Mira wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself, and Tanis had trimmed his beard close, his shirt pressed and collar clean. They exchanged no vows beyond the ones they'd already lived: steadfastness, kindness, truth. Afterward, they shared bread and coffee with those who'd come. Ruthie brought a small tin of wildflowers. Ellie brought a jar of honey. Mrs. Havers shared a quilt square her mother had made, stitched with a pine tree at the center. At dusk, Mira and Tanis returned to their home. The porch was finished now, wide enough for 2 chairs and the kind of silence that held nothing between it. As the stars rose, Mira leaned back, her hand resting on Tanis's knee. "We'll plant peach trees next spring," she said. "I want something that blooms before the frost is gone." He nodded. "And I'll build you a bench to sit beneath them." They watched the sky turn silver and soft. The air smelled of warm earth and cedar. He reached for her hand, and she laced her fingers through his, their palms fitting like they'd been waiting for each other all along. Inside the house, the books sat neatly in the new cabinet, the fire banked low, the quilt laid over the bed. The life they had built, quiet, certain, and deeply theirs, held fast against the dark, and neither of them ever walked alone again.